Welcome to Faith Alliance for Climate Solutions' 5th Annual Virginia Climate Crisis Forum. I'm Shyamali Hauth, Vice Chair of VAC's Board of Directors. Faith Alliance for Climate Solutions unites people of faith to develop moral solutions to the climate crisis. Through our network of over 2,500 supporters drawn from 75 faith communities in Northern Virginia, we advocate for equitable climate policies that bring real change. 2020 has highlighted the inequities in our country through the devastating global pandemic, through repeated incidents of police brutality that underscore systemic racism, through the wildfires that rage out west, and through economic insecurity right here in Virginia. The connection between these crises is ever more apparent. And while we are all impacted in some way, we know our poor and marginalized neighbors are affected most significantly. Before we begin, we're excited to share the release of our 2021 Fairfax to Zero Advocacy Priorities ebook. This 32-page booklet is our first ever and lays out our top advocacy priorities for the county, our public schools, and the state. You can get your copy by visiting our website, faithforclimate.org, and clicking on advocacy/campaigns. We organize faith-based advocacy teams in Fairfax County, Arlington County, and the city of Alexandria. Consider joining us. This evening, we have an amazing panel of people with deep knowledge of the connection between energy and inefficiency of housing and social justice. In Northern Virginia, 14% of households have severe housing problems, including high energy burdens. Tonight, we will explore how new energy efficiency programs can help our neighbors with the lowest incomes benefit from long-term cost savings, and how this moves us towards stability, sustainability, carbon neutrality. Following our panel discussion, we will move to a one-on-one discussion with Senator Mark Warner to address the climate crisis more broadly. FACS also invited Dan Gade, Senator Warner's Republican opponent in the November election, to participate, but he has declined our invitation. Before we begin, let's lead with a prayer. There's a line in a Native American poem where the author prays to the Great Spirit of life to give him the wisdom, quote, to walk softly on the earth, unquote, to be our Mother Earth's caretaker. I come from the Hindu faith tradition, and this is the prayer we say in the morning before stepping upon the earth, our Bhumi Pranam, prayer to earth. Samudra Vasana Devi, Parvatastana Mandale, Vishnu Patni Namastubhyam, Padasparsham Kshamasvame. O Mother Earth, who has the ocean as clothes and mountains and forests on her body, who is the wife of Lord Vishnu, I bow to you. Please forgive me for touching you with my feet. Let's begin now. I'll start by introducing each of our 4 panelists, who will then share a few opening remarks. Delegate Charniele Herring, a resident of Northern Virginia for over 30 years, was elected to the General Assembly in January of 2009. She is the first Black woman from Northern Virginia ever elected to the Virginia legislature. Her track record includes leadership on women's health, homelessness, and environmental stewardship. In the 2020 General Assembly, she was a patron of the Clean Energy and Community Flood Preparedness Act that enabled the Commonwealth to join the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, or RGGI. Delegate Herring, welcome.
Thank you so much, and it's so good to see everybody, and I'm so happy that we have a nice crowd joining us online. I just wanted to say thank you again for this opportunity to speak. The connection of faith and preservation of our environment is very important to me. It's something that I was, raised as a child to protect everything around us, and from the little creature that crawls on our sidewalk, and to of course value and nourish our air around us and protect it. And, that's what, brought me to sort of the bills this year. Something that I feel strongly about is making sure that we're reducing our carbon emissions. But at the same time, this issue about justice. And I was very proud to patron the environmental justice bill this year, which, it instills into our code of Virginia that says to the Commonwealth and to everyone here that we value equity and justice when it comes to the environment, and so that there is not negative impacts on communities, especially children. We have a record number of children with breathing issues and asthma, and it just, when our environment's cleaner, that makes them healthier and able to thrive. So again, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here, and I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much, Delegate Herring. Next, Trieste Lockwood is a Senior Policy Advisor for the Office of Governor Ralph Northam. She started as a Senior Policy Advisor to the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality. Before joining the administration, she was the Government Relations Lead for the Virginia League of Conservation Voters and has worked in policy at numerous nonprofit organizations. Trieste graduated from Pennsylvania State University with a Bachelor of Arts and Bachelor of Science degrees. She went on to earn a Juris Doctor and a Public Policy Program Certificate from the Catholic University School of Law. Welcome, Trieste.
Thank you, and good evening, everyone. So I'm also very excited to be here and to have this conversation tonight. I've been in the law and policy field for almost 10 years, and one of my first roles in Richmond was doing the environmental work for the Interfaith Center for Public Policy many years ago. So I'll just highlight three main climate and energy initiatives that have occurred during this administration so far that we'll see implemented over the coming years. So first, in 2019, the governor signed Executive Order 43, which set forth the policy goals of powering the Commonwealth's electric grid with 30% renewable energy by 2030 and 100% carbon-free energy by 2050. Second, during the 2020 General Assembly session, as you'll hear more about tonight, the Virginia Clean Economy Act was passed. And this bill made some of these targets law, meaning that guaranteeing that we will have a clean and efficient energy future for Virginia, which we'll talk about more this evening as well. And then third, you'll hear more about our participation in RGGI, which Leader Herring touched on. And this policy really complements these clean energy policies well, because it has to do with reducing our overall carbon emissions in Virginia. So again, thank you, and I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you very much. Harry Godfrey leads the nonprofit Virginia Advanced Energy Economy, focusing on growing the advanced energy industry in the Commonwealth. Harry's experience in the industry, federal government, and academia has equipped him to lead his organization's advocacy before legislators, regulators, and the governor's office in Richmond. Before arriving at AEE, Harry worked at Invenergy and O-Power, developing a background in renewable generation and energy efficiency. He previously held positions in the White House Office of Legislative Affairs and the Office of Majority Whip James E. Clyburn. Welcome, Harry.
Thank you so much, Shyamali. It's such a pleasure to be here today and speak with everybody this evening about what's a really important issue. I think in the midst of 2020, amidst everything that has happened this year, it's easy to lose sight of some of the accomplishments that actually occurred during the initial General Assembly session at the beginning of this year. Trieste and Majority Leader Herring have mentioned a couple of them already, and we'll talk more about them, but I do really want to highlight the passage of the Clean Economy Act, because both from the private sector and the public sector point of view, this was a really revolutionary change. It made Virginia the first state in the South with a clean energy standard, and it does four big things. We'll drill into these a little bit more, but it has a decarbonization standard that picks up in the future where our initial membership in the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative leaves off and carries us forward, so that by mid-century, we're actually looking at fully decarbonizing. It is a clean energy standard. At the same time, we're ramping down our fossil-fired power plants. We're ramping up renewables and clean energy. It unlocks distributed solar resources, so rooftop solar and other resources like that, so people have more control over their energy. And last but absolutely not least, it prioritizes demand-side resources like energy efficiency and demand response. And they're really the bedrock of how we make this energy transition, because what they're doing is both lowering the overall demand for energy, but with demand response, which is really time-targeted energy efficiency, we're actually able to go about shifting where there's demand to meet supply so we can better utilize our renewable resources while making certain this transition is affordable for everybody. So it's so important that we incorporate this, and I'm so glad we're having this conversation about how we actually deal with the energy burden that's there. I'd be remiss if I didn't also mention this process. So much of this conversation tonight is going to be a conversation around how we reduce the energy burden to individuals across the Commonwealth, and that's really critical. But we should also realize the opportunity we have in making the transition towards a clean energy economy. You know, there are over 101,000 Virginians employed in advanced energy across our Commonwealth today. That's more than everyone who's in the hospitality industry. That's twice as many people that are in real estate, and 79,000 of those jobs are in energy efficiency. And they're in all corners of the state, from the hollows of Wise County to the streets of Arlington, and they're employing people with every skill set. So not only is this a critical endeavor for tackling the climate crisis, but it's an extraordinary economic opportunity for helping us rebuild post-COVID and the economic downturn we face. Really excited to be discussing this tonight. Thank you, Shyamali.
Thank you so much, Harry. I appreciate that. Chase Counts is next. Chase oversees a portfolio of federally funded and utility-sponsored weatherization and energy efficiency programs designed to serve low-income, elderly, and other energy-burdened residential households. He and his team coordinate with state offices, electric and gas utilities, local government officials, subcontractors, and trade allies to deliver services safely and effectively, serving more than 13,000 households since 2015. He's a certified energy manager, licensed Virginia residential building energy analyst, a fellow with the Clean Energy Leadership Institute, and was recently recognized on Energy News Network's 2020 40 Under 40 list of clean energy leaders. Congratulations on that. Chase joined CHP Energy Solutions in 2010 after completing a BS in Environmental Policy and Planning at Virginia Tech. Welcome, Chase.
Good evening, and thank you so much for having me this evening to speak on my favorite topic, weatherization. Before I get started, I'd like to first acknowledge that as a white male, my perspective is limited. However, I've chosen a career path to use the advantages that I have to try to balance the scales of social, environmental, health, and economic injustice through weatherization. And while I'm not currently experiencing any undue energy burdens, I have served energy burdened households for the last 11 years. Weatherization is one of the many tools that we have in the toolbox to address these injustices. And while I'm a little biased, I believe that weatherization is the Swiss Army knife of the tools available, able to address so many of these issues in a single package. Most folks may not be familiar with the term weatherization, so I'd like to start there. Weatherization is the practice of installing measures in a home to reduce energy costs for households by increasing the energy efficiency of their homes while ensuring their health and safety. And health and safety is a critical factor in the work that we do. Weatherization became public policy in 1976 through the U.S. Department of Energy. My company, Community Housing Partners, or CHP Energy Solutions, became a weatherization provider at the launch of the program. And we have weatherized more than 40,000 Virginian households since then. There are 17 weatherization providers in Virginia that are broken into different geographic territories, and about 700 weatherization providers across the country. We are the largest provider in Virginia, covering about 1/3 of the Commonwealth, including all of the localities in Northern Virginia. And we are the 10th largest provider in the country. Households must meet certain eligibility requirements to qualify for DOE weatherization, primarily centered around household annual income. So right now it's about $62,000 per year for a family of 4. But there are other considerations for eligibility as well. For households exceeding income thresholds for DOE weatherization, there are other incentive-based programs through utilities like Dominion Energy Virginia and Washington Gas that moderate and higher income households may have access to as well. Weatherization is important because it can reduce energy costs for the disabled person living on a fixed income. It can help keep a family cool in the summer, even if it's subjected to urban heat island effect. It can free up limited funds for single parent households to better afford groceries. It can also help an elderly person to not have to choose between keeping the heat on in the winter or affording their medication. For those reasons, I'm very excited to share my perspective with you all tonight and really appreciate the opportunity to spread what we call the weatherization gospel with your communities.
Thank you so much, Chase. Appreciate that. So now let's dig in a little deeper into each of these issues. Let's begin with Delegate Herring. Charniele, this year you pushed through the landmark legislation through the House of Delegates. For purposes of our discussion today, perhaps one of the most important was your patronage of the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, RGGI, as it's more commonly known. And it will generate millions of dollars for energy efficiency projects in low-income communities. Can you tell us a little bit about why you fought for that?
Thank you. Yes. It was important to me because equity is important to me. When I started working on the project, my priority was making sure that the money that the Commonwealth made from RGGI, from its participation in RGGI, would help people who have suffered disproportionately under the previous energy policies, including low-income communities and communities of color. And also beyond the equity issue, it made sense to fund the program. The goal is to reduce the amount of energy we use and the amount of fossil fuels we burn to get it. Energy efficiency is the cheapest of all ways to meet people's energy needs. And the programs are a very an incredibly cost-effective way to reduce the amount of fossil fuels we burn. They are basically a low-hanging fruit for any state or community that wants to become greener. And the programs are also the right thing to do. And we got to a full 50% of all RGGI money will go into a fund. So I'm really excited about that and the opportunity to help the communities, again, that were disproportionately impacted. So it's about equity for me.
That's terrific and very good to hear. Trieste, now that RGGI legislation has been signed into law by Governor Northam, can you tell us how the millions of dollars in new funds will be distributed to people who need it most? I've heard that about a stakeholders outreach. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. So RGGI is essentially a multi-state program to reduce carbon emissions, and it's composed of 10 states and now us. So we developed a rule on how it would be implemented. And since Leader Herring's bill passed in 2020, we are officially in RGGI, which means that as we reduce the amount of carbon pollution that power plants emit, the pollution allowances are auctioned on a market with the other states, and the revenue from the allowances comes back to the Commonwealth. So we should see first a 30% reduction in carbon emissions by 2030, and we anticipate about $100 million in revenue coming to the Commonwealth this spring. So Leader Herring's legislation was very good in kind of setting out where that money will go to mitigate climate change and reduce the energy burdens. So 45% of the revenue will go towards a resiliency fund to assist localities and their residents that are impacted by recurrent flooding, sea level rise, and flooding from severe weather events. And at least 25% of that funding will be used for resiliency projects in low-income geographic areas. 50% of the revenue will go to the Department of Housing and Community Development, known as DHCD, to support low-income energy efficiency programs, which we'll talk more about. 2% of the revenue will go to DHCD to administer these low-income energy efficiency programs, and 3% of the revenue will go to DEQ to carry out the implementation of RGGI and to plan for statewide climate change and mitigation activities. So emissions accounting, reporting, local government assistance, and policy work. And you mentioned the DHCD energy efficiency stakeholder process. So as I mentioned, a lot of the money will be going there to help with energy efficiency. And we anticipate the funding coming in the spring, which means that this fall, the stakeholder process will begin. And DHCD actually already has a website up where you can express interest, and that's dhcd.virginia.gov/RGGI, RGGI. So you can stay tuned for more information on that process as it kicks off this fall. We will also be taking stakeholder feedback on the specifics. So we know that the RGGI energy efficiency investments will focus on affordable housing construction and renovation projects that target low income and extremely low income individuals. So this will be part of ongoing affordable housing initiatives through the Virginia Housing Trust Fund and the Public Housing Transformation Initiative. At the end of the day, we know that energy efficiency is a reliable, affordable source of energy, and the goal is to ensure that secure, deeper levels of energy efficiency come from these DHCD funds in affordable housing, construction, and renovation of projects. These programs will provide long-term housing affordability for low-income Virginians in both multifamily and single-family housing, and reduce the costs that are often felt by the tenants. Thanks.
Great, thank you. That's a lot of great information there. Harry, can you tell us a little bit about the role your member companies are playing in making Virginia more energy efficient?
Absolutely. So energy efficiency is, as an industry, an incredibly diverse one in terms of the technological offerings provided there. I'm going to talk about 4 different types of companies, all of which are working to do business, doing business in Virginia, and helping save various parts of our economy, energy, and in turn money. One of the notable ways in which energy efficiency is commonly applied is through a set of companies called ESCOs, energy service companies. And what an ESCO does is essentially, let's imagine that you've got an old air conditioning system in your school or in your municipal building. Typically, you don't have a lot of capital lying around. I mean, this is always the case with local budgets to go about making that replacement, but you're spending more than you ought to be spending upon, heating and cooling that building. An energy service company is able to come in and actually utilize their own capital to undertake the necessary retrofits and renovations, improving your overall energy efficiency. But at the same time, we'll actually then get a cut of the operational savings that you see. So they're able to recycle that into future investments. So organizations and companies like Trane and Amoresco, for instance, that are part of AEE, are ESCOs that work in these sort of fields and are doing work in Virginia. Another sort of set of energy efficiency companies are demand response and aggregation companies. So imagine a demand response that I mentioned briefly before is really time-targeted energy efficiency. It's reducing energy at a specific time, maybe shifting that usage or just generally reducing it to a different point in time. And that's so useful because if we're moving towards more wind, more solar, then we need to go about shifting when we're utilizing energy to make certain that demand is meeting load. Well, there are a set of companies like C-Power and LX, for instance, that are member companies of ours that are helping, work with multiple industries to coordinate around when they're utilizing their energy so that they can actually manage that accordingly, and then feeding that back into our larger marketplace so that they're getting value out of that. So a really fascinating way. When we turn to the more residential sector, a couple of companies worth noting. Nest is a member company of ours. I think a lot of people are familiar with their thermostats, but they're smart learning thermostats allow you to be more energy efficient in terms of your home energy use. So much of our home energy use comes from heating and cooling. Anybody who's seen their electric bills over the past couple of months knows air conditioning is really expensive sometimes. So technologies like Nest help us better manage that. And then even more fundamentally, companies like Oracle Utilities, previously O-Power, help people make better energy decisions by nudging them and using behavioral psychology and simple messaging to move them towards better energy solutions, both in terms of their behavior and in terms of the technological selection. So that just scratches the surface of the diversity of the energy efficiency and demand response industry that AE represents, and that's working in the state to try and help drive down our energy use and utilize the most cost-effective clean energy resource, which of course is energy efficiency.
Wow, great. Thank you so much. Chase, Since your organization has experience providing energy efficiency services to the community, what can you tell us about some of the kinds of problems that you most frequently encounter?
Yeah, the problems that we come across can be broken down into 4 primary categories. So we have seasonal energy loads, and as you might guess, those are the energy loads that vary by season. You think heating and cooling. So in this case, how airtight and insulated is your home? Does it have an effective, basically, jacket surrounding it? Is your heating and cooling system operating optimally? Is it running efficiently? Is it even sized correctly? The second category is what we call base energy loads. And those are loads that are not as subject to seasonal changes. So you might think water heating or your refrigerator, plug-in appliances. Third category is health and safety measures. So once we effectively weatherize a home, particularly if we're doing anything to manipulate the building envelope, meaning how well can air change throughout the home? Does it bring in outdoor air? Does it effectively exhaust air? We need to make sure that we're able to maintain proper indoor air quality so we're not creating problems in the process of, in the pursuit of reducing energy bills. And that also might include moisture control strategies. But the fourth category, and what I'd like to really hone in on, is what I refer to as prerequisite measures. And this encompasses anything that, if left unaddressed, may compromise the safety of the occupant or our crews or the effectiveness of the weatherization measures installed. So you might think about a roof leak. We can't effectively go in and invest funds, whether it's federally funded or utility funds that we're using. We can't install attic insulation with a roof leak there that might compromise the effectiveness of that insulation. Similarly, if the structure itself, if there are weak floors, that's not something that we can leave unattended, unaddressed. We can't send our crews in there because we might create more problems than we solve. And those types of measures, they don't necessarily have a direct energy savings attached to them, but they're prerequisite to the actual energy savings measures themselves. We currently have access to those federal and utility funds that can be used to address seasonal energy loads, base energy loads, and even in some cases, limited funds available to address health and safety measures. But we have virtually no funds available to support prerequisite measures. So myself and my weatherization colleagues are really hoping that RGGI funds may be allocated in this way to be able to unlock hundreds of households that we've had to defer weatherization services to because we have no means of paying for the cost of a roof repair or any electric or plumbing or general carpentry repairs needed prior to weatherization. We recently did a survey across all 17 weatherization providers in Virginia, and we found that nearly a quarter of the households that we go out to on an annual basis across the Commonwealth wind up being deferred because of these issues. And these aren't necessarily high cost high cost repairs. We just need access to some funds that can then translate into energy savings through our other programs.
Wow, that's fantastic information, and a good way to allocate some resources potentially as we move forward. Charniele, we know that RGGI is not the only law to emerge from the winter session of the Virginia legislature to address the climate crisis.
Right.
What are some of the other ways the Commonwealth is finally moving forward?
Right. Well, thanks for that question. And I'm really excited to talk about one of the bills that was actually patroned by two friends of mine, Rick Sullivan in the House and Jennifer McClellan in the Senate, as the Clean Economy Act. This is a a big deal because it requires nearly all coal-fired plants to close by the end of 2024. That's huge. And it outlines in the bill a path for Virginia to get to zero carbon emissions by 2050. So again, it establishes a new renewable portfolio standard. I will tell you all, in 2010, I filed a bill to just study a study about having a renewable portfolio, and that was killed. So we've come a long way in terms of advancing clean energy. The Clean Economy Act also requires the construction of 5,200 megawatt offshore wind turbines and 16,100 megawatts onshore wind and solar. Requires Dominion Energy to prioritize hiring local workers from historically disadvantaged communities for the projects. And it creates a new program to reduce the energy burden for low-income customers. And then the other one that I would love to mention again is the Environmental Justice Council, which I mentioned earlier. This is something, again, that's been worked on for years and finally got it passed, actually. It's exciting that, last year it finally got a hearing. This year we were able to get it passed. And it's environmental justice is for the first time now defined in the Virginia Code, never had before. So it wasn't, once it's defined in the code, it's sort of this accepted concept and becomes part of our construct when we look at policy and energy policies or environmental policies. The bill requires that the council membership also be representative of traditionally underserved and underrepresented groups, including Native American tribes from Virginia, grassroots organizations, civil rights advocates, and members of impacted communities. And I encourage everyone to please go to their website because they're doing some interesting things. It's www.naturalresources.virginia.gov, and you can sign up for updates, and it's a very good group. And again, I'm so proud of all of them and the work that they've been putting into it before even it was codified. So it's really exciting what's happening.
That's fantastic, and we appreciate all the effort on all those fronts. Trieste, I know that you as a representative for the Northam administration were very much involved in much of the climate and energy legislation that was signed into law this year. What can you add to what the majority leader just told us?
Sure. Well, she touched on some very important pieces of legislation, that both the Clean Economy Act, that's our first mandatory renewable portfolio standard, and the EJ Council legislation, that is the first time that an Environmental Justice Council for the state has been codified, which means that it will continue on in law after this governor's administration. So both were very exciting. And I can add a little bit more to as we've said, the Clean Economy Act is was a huge endeavor, and there are many different components to it. So a few more pieces of that were really great to see come across the finish line. And I'll touch on a few of those right now. So we also deemed 2,700 megawatts of energy storage in the public interest. And we know that energy storage is a really important piece of this increase in renewable energy. The legislation also requires that the State Corporation Commission consider the social cost of carbon in any application for energy generating facilities. That's also a first for Virginia. The bill requires the Department of Mines, Minerals, and Energy to evaluate the implementation of the act, to review and ensure that there are not additional burdens imposed on historically economically disadvantaged communities as we do transition to 100% carbon free. And then on energy efficiency, this legislation established our first energy efficiency resource standard, which is essentially a long-term energy savings target for utilities, requiring utilities to procure a percentage of their energy through investing in energy efficiency measures. So the EERS, Energy Efficiency Resource Standard, and this legislation means that by 2025, Appalachian Power will have achieved 2% savings, and Dominion will have achieved 5% savings. I know Harry will be talking a little bit more about that as well, but overall, we're very pleased that this piece is there, because when utilities can help customers reduce electricity use, it frees up electricity resources because we're all using less, which means that we have less need for new generating facilities, right? Which is a good thing for climate change. I'll also mention some other clean energy and climate initiatives that were built into this legislation and other bills. So we talked a little bit about offshore wind, and this bill establishes our first offshore wind office for the state at the Department of Mine, Minerals, and Energy. And we mentioned the target, 5,200 megawatts of offshore wind are declared in the public interest. So as this wind energy is developed, and this is, remember, a really new and exciting industry for Virginia, we're on the cusp, right, of a huge offshore wind boom on the East Coast, but specifically, hopefully here, starting here. And as this wind energy is developed, there will be competitive procurement, cost containment, and local workforce and economic development. And then on solar, we've also greatly expanded distributed solar in the Commonwealth, making it more accessible. So we've increased the total amount of renewable energy that can be net metered in a utility's service territory from 1% to 6%. We've expanded the scale of the pilot program for third-party power purchase agreements from 50 megawatts to 1,000 megawatts in Dominion territory, and from 7 megawatts to 40 megawatts in Appalachian Power territory. And this was huge because, as you know, power purchase agreements are mechanisms that allow for entities to finance solar. And often these entities are nonprofits, schools, governments, and others that would like to use solar on site. So the previous 50 megawatt cap was reaching capacity, and projects were really waiting to see with the General Assembly how we could address it, right? And I think this bill and others really helped fix that problem. And then we've also seen progress on shared solar. So now there's provisions that allow for multi-family tenants and others to participate in solar subscription programs, which means that customers will be able to purchase power through a subscription in a shared solar facility. And in one example, there's a carve out to ensure that low-income customers also have access to one of these programs. And lastly, I'll mention CPACE legislation. So this legislation authorized the Department of Mines, Minerals, and Energy to serve as a statewide sponsor for a clean energy financing program called CPACE. So this will allow DMME to run this program to support localities that want to fund energy-related projects like clean energy, energy efficiency, and resiliency projects with no upfront costs. Some localities are already taking off with this program. There's active programs in Arlington, Fairfax, and Loudoun, and other localities are interested. So we know that having a statewide sponsor to help with this will allow more localities to get these programs off the ground. Thanks.
Terrific, thank you so much. So Harry, how difficult was it to fight to get the Clean Economy Act passed? And what other ways does it address reducing the energy burden through efficiencies?
In a word, Shyamali, it was difficult. And Trieste and a lot of other folks on this conference are chuckling because all of them were involved in the effort to make this happen. I cannot emphasize enough how much of a team effort this was to get it across the finish line. This bill actually died in Senate subcommittee before it got revived and it got through that process. And I think there was an impression too about midway through the session, for everybody watching who isn't already familiar with the intricacies of Virginia General Assembly process, there's a point called crossover where bills have to make it out of one chamber and over to the other for them to be considered. If they don't, they're dead. And that's about halfway through the legislative process. Well, the Virginia Clean Economy Act emerged from each chamber before crossover, but they were different bills with different provisions in them. And so the process of reconciling that between a version that may have reached too far and maybe a version that didn't go far enough in the minds of certain members, finding the middle ground between that and dealing with all of the parties involved in that was a challenge. And it's a huge credit to our patrons, to Senator McClellan, to Delegate Sullivan, to leadership in both chambers, starting with Majority Leader Herring, with Speaker Eileen Filler-Corn, and all the way down. And as well to the governor's office, who stepped in and found the strategic moments, Trieste and her colleague Angela Navarro and the larger team there to help facilitate the negotiations around that to really move it forward. I know that coming out of this, there are a set of folks who say, well, some folks say it goes too far, and some folks say it doesn't go far enough. I like to think about it in terms of a car analogy. And if we're talking about the climate crisis here, it's Indy 500. We want to win this race before it catches up with us. Well, maybe we need to get the car a little bit faster. The reality is, until we have a car there, in order to move us forward, we can't accelerate at all. The Virginia Clean Economy Act is the car that can take us there and actually help us win the race. And so I know that there's going to be sort of continued work on this and legislative sessions ahead, but we're really excited about this level of accomplishment. I think the majority leader and Trieste touched upon a lot of the ways in which this, the Clean Economy Act helps address that energy burden. I want to emphasize a couple of them. Trieste made a point about the importance of having an energy efficiency standard. And really, this is the first time in Virginia history. It's so critical to actually have a savings target to say the utilities have to go about prioritizing this. And we do this with a carrot and stick approach. The utilities are rewarded for investing in energy efficiency. But if they don't meet their energy efficiency targets, they are not allowed to build new power plants. That is how we are fundamentally prioritizing energy efficiency in this provision. And when you do that, when you invest in the least cost energy resource out there, which is efficiency, you help drive down costs for everyone, because it means you don't need to invest in new power plants, in new transmission lines, and all of the things that drive our rates up in Virginia. That's why prioritizing energy efficiency is so important. A share of those energy efficiency programs that the utilities have to run, 15% of those have to go to low and moderate income consumers as a bare minimum. That's 3 times the level that previously existed there. And Trieste mentioned this as well, raising that PPA cap in Dominion service territory and in NAPCO service territory is so important. And here's why. Because power purchase agreements allow particularly nonprofit institutions, churches, schools to take advantage of the cost savings of solar without putting any money down. That's a remarkable thing to be able to do. But until we raise that cap, schools, churches, other nonprofits were simply locked out of that. And so that's a real cost savings there. It's outside of the realm of efficiency, but it is a way in which the Clean Economy Act is helping reduce the energy burden, folks.
That's terrific. Thank you. Chase, in case some of our listeners are unaware, what is an energy audit? And are folks sometimes surprised by the results of energy audits of their homes?
Nearly 100% of the time. So an energy audit, it's similar to a financial audit. An energy audit evaluates a home's energy assets and its liabilities. And we do this through a few different steps. First is a visual and sensory inspection. So we're looking for any obvious energy leaks, any breaks in the building envelope that I've referred to previously. Even feelings like a damp, musky room can indicate moisture concerns, high humidity levels. We are also keeping an eye out for any obvious health and safety or prerequisite measure concerns that may take the appearance of disconnected flue pipes or signs of a backdrafting combustion appliance like soot around a water heater, the top of a gas water heater. The second component is diagnostic testing. And this is primarily comprised of air tightness or a blower door test that actually measures how airtight the building is. Duct tightness testing, which does the same thing, but strictly for the duct system. How much are you losing behind the walls that your duct system is, how much are you spending conditioning the air behind the walls that your ducts are running through. We also complete combustion appliance zone testing. We make sure that if you have any combustion appliances like a gas furnace, gas water heater, that there is sufficient combustion air to feed those appliances safely, so they operate safely. And then we also complete combustion analysis testing that measures actual samples of the flue gas and ensures that it's operating efficiently and not letting off carbon monoxide or undue levels of O2 or CO2. We will take those bits of information and we may run it through an energy modeling software program that then results or leads to a scope of work that we will then send crews out, install those measures. The energy model will kind of confirm whether or not those measures are cost effective. Our crews will go out and install those measures to DOE approved standard work specifications. And then we will send out a quality control inspector to confirm that the materials and the measures installed are up to those DOE standards. The thing that everybody thinks about where everybody thinks their energy is being lost in their home, it's always the windows. However, windows may contribute to the immediate comfort concerns a resident or occupant is facing, but it's typically the most expensive measure with the lowest return on investment. So we typically focus on building envelope upgrades, air sealing the attic plane and the crawl space plane, making sure that we insulate those planes. And one thing I would also like to mention is that finding an energy auditor is not always that easy. A lot of people just kind of assume that their HVAC contractor can complete this. And that's not always the case, although the tides are turning in that department. I would highly recommend anybody that wants to get an energy audit pursue or go to Building Performance Institute or BPI.org and find a Gold Star contractor in your area. And in Virginia, another way to make sure that you're going to get a sufficient energy assessment of your own is to make sure that that contractor also holds, in Virginia, we have a licensing requirement called the Residential Building Energy Analyst License. And that's another safeguard to evaluate your contractor.
Great. Well, thank you. And that's really good information on how to go about getting the energy audits. I actually had a neighbor ask me about that recently. So in the next section, I would like to ask a series of questions and invite anyone to jump in to answer it. So first, the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy ranked Virginia 29th in the nation overall in its 2019 State Energy Efficiency Scorecard. In the narrower category of electricity savings, Virginia came in a dismal 47th. The Commonwealth's uniform statewide building codes are a decade out of date. What's stopping our state from becoming a leader in energy efficiency? Anyone want to jump in on that? You can go ahead and unmute yourselves if you haven't done so, and that way you can jump in.
Well, I'll start on something which I'm sort of giggling. It's not a laughing matter though when you think about it. You said our statewide building codes are a decade out of date. We could probably start there, honestly, and start updating the code, and and again, help us become move in a different direction when we're talking about energy efficiency. So that would be a great start, I think.
Terrific. Anyone else?
Sure. Just two really quick things. So I'm optimistic that we'll see that score improve over the next year because of the mandatory energy efficiency resource standard, that ERS we've been talking about so much. Having those in place is so important. But what matters now is implementation around that. And that implementation is really going to happen at the State Corporation Commission. It's the regulatory body that oversees all the utilities. And it's going through a period of transition right now. We have a commissioner who has just been appointed to that, who the General Assembly, we hope, will actually confirm when they come back into regular session. And then the current chair of the commission has actually been nominated to serve on the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. So there may be another opening on that commission before the end of the year. The composition of that commission is going to do a lot in terms of how we effectively implement this and whether or not we meet our efficiency savings targets or not. So a big thing to focus on here in the next 6 months and several years.
Great. Would anyone else like to chime in on that?
And just touching base on the statewide building energy codes, I think that's been a breakdown historically of, I hate to call it this, but bureaucratic leadership. There's been certain lobbying entities that have gotten in the way of making adjustments to improve Virginia's energy codes in the past. And I think those entities are starting to kind of lose some of their influence, and we now have more energy and sustainability minded individuals in place to provide that that leadership in those departments.
Great. Trieste, do you have any comments on that?
I'll just add that I agree. I think we can definitely get there. I think the will is there for us to be a leader on energy efficiency and also the workforce. As Harry mentioned, we do have a growing energy efficiency workforce in Virginia. And with that, there should come more opportunities to kind of advance the policies behind energy efficiency to get us there. And with the energy efficiency resource standard, that's a huge step forward. So I look forward to the future ratings, and I'm hopeful.
Great. Can you talk, the next question is to talk a little bit about some of the energy efficiency programs available to Virginians. What can people take advantage of today?
Well, I can start with two that are coming out of our agencies. So the Department of Housing and Community Development has a weatherization program, assistance program for low income customers. And the agency works with nonprofits to reduce household energy use through the installation of cost-effective saving measures. And the Department of Mines, Minerals, and Energy has a program that allows for energy efficiency performance-based contracting to public buildings and facilities like local governments and schools. And this program helps these facilities control and limit their energy use. So those are two from the state perspective.
Anyone else have anything to add?
And in addition, the utilities have come out, in particular, Dominion Energy has, as of January 2021, they will have 26 energy efficiency and demand response related programs that offer different incentives for different customer classes. So there's residential income qualifying programs, there's residential market rate or non-income qualifying programs, there's non-residential commercial industrial programs, and they even set up an online energy efficiency marketplace. And those are, I think, within the last 2 years, they've now invested well over $300 million into those programs.
Great. There was a question that came in. Could money from RGGI be used for health and safety measures before energy efficiency programs can be put in place? Does anyone have an idea on that?
Shyamali, I'm not sure I understand the question, but if I do, I think there's an idea that somehow health and safety and energy efficiency are separable items. But let's talk about this really specifically in terms of the pandemic we're currently facing. No small part of what we know about COVID-19, and I am by no means a medical expert, so let me make that abundantly clear, has to do, some of the risk environments are indoor, stagnant air environments. Improving overall air circulation, HVAC systems that move that air through that effectively, in our schools, in our community centers, places where people have to be, in our hospitals, can actually go about helping that. So there's an efficiency methodology that actually improves health and safety at the same time. These two things are not mutually exclusive.
Okay, great, thanks. Thanks for that. Really quickly, you all care deeply about addressing the climate crisis, and I'd like to ask you to tell us what it means to you personally. Who would like to start with that one?
I guess I'll get started off on that question. What stands out to me most is that the climate crisis is not going to impact everyone equally, especially early on. And just because you're not experiencing it currently in the moment, doesn't mean that it's not affecting others. So we need to approach it with some level of empathy and understanding to our neighbors. And I'd also like to mention that while addressing the climate crisis, we need to have a just transition. We cannot leave any community behind, whether it's geographic or an economic class. or a race of individuals.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to share your personal reason for being engaged on this?
Well, I would just like to just share that, you know, when we started, and I had to bring it back to your opening prayer, that, and for me personally, addressing this climate crisis is actually coming from, again, a place of faith, and that we are keepers of what we have inherited when we come up on this earth, and it's and being gentle to the environment, because we are just temporary stewards. And you know, this is the environment that's going to be inherited by our, you know, children and future generations. So for me, combating the climate crisis to make sure that there is a sustainable environment that they're able to live in and to enjoy as much as that, you know, we all sort of enjoy. There's, I think, for everybody, everybody may not go hiking. There's a little bit. There's either you're going to a garden or you're going somewhere. And that's very important to just well-being for us as individual humans, that we are part of nature in of itself and enjoying the environment around us. And so for me, combating climate crisis is make sure that exists for future generations.
Thank you. Trieste.
Sure. That's a really good question. And I think, you know, for me, it's also around future generations. And I'm also driven by the fact that we have a lot of the solutions right now. So often in environmental policy, we try to get ahead of the curve, right? We want to make sure we're prepared for a hurricane before the hurricane comes. And this is one of those situations, except it's just on a massive, massive scale, which can be a little overwhelming because climate change does have such widespread impacts. But I am optimistic that, you know, because of the different facets and different people it reaches, that you know, slowly we are seeing solutions come into fruition. So with those solutions, we know things will get better. And again, I'm just driven by the fact that we have those solutions and we have people who are willing to help move those forward. So I think, you know, we're getting there.
Thanks. Harry, would you like to share anything?
Sure. You know, when we have these conversations about the worst possible impacts of climate change, the year most often mentioned, what happens if we pass the 1.5 degree mark? What happens when we pass the 2 degree mark? The year most often mentioned to talk about the widespread ramifications is 2100. And I know that for the vast majority of folks looking at it, that feels like a long way off. This past weekend, we celebrated my son's first birthday. God willing, he'll be 80 in 2100. That's a real thing for him. If we don't address this now, the ramifications for him, for a person who's alive today and almost but not quite walking, you know, have really significant implications. So this isn't something that we can wait on, and this isn't some distant future. It's here with us now, and we need to address it now for immediate future generations.
Fantastic. That was summed up really wonderfully. Thank you. We've reached the end of our time. Thank you to all of our panelists for a wonderful discussion and for shedding light on this important topic. I invite each of you, if you want to share any final remarks, we'll keep it real brief as we're getting close to the end. Chase, would you like to start us out?
Absolutely. Thank you again for excuse me, having me. I'd also like to refer anybody that's interested in anything I've talked about this evening. Our website is chpenergysolutions.org. We will evaluate you for eligibility for any of our programs. You can also check out Virginia Energy Sense. That also is a webpage that offers all of the incentive programs available. You could also check your individual utility web pages. They usually have an energy efficiency section. And feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn or follow me at on Twitter at Chase_accounts. I'd love to continue the conversation with anybody interested.
Great. Harry?
Sure. Thanks. And thanks for hosting this forum. I think this is such an important conversation. I want to end this on a positive note, in no small part because so much of the conversation around climate change is about trying to avert loss and minimizing harm. And what we often miss in that conversation is the really extraordinary opportunity. If we look at global trends, if we look at trends in the United States, we are moving towards a clean energy economy, a clean transit economy. And I think the choice that we face before Virginians is whether or not we're going to lead or follow on that. There's an extraordinary opportunity here to seize that and have that be the foundation for a new and burgeoning economic sector. I mean, a sector that already employs over 100,000 Virginians is really significant. We've got to skate to where the puck's going to be, not where the puck is today. And that means embracing policies like the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, like the Clean Economy Act, because they'll result not only in averting the worst impacts of climate change, but in additional prosperity, in good, sustainable jobs for families across the Commonwealth.
Great, thank you. Trieste.
Sure. Well, thank you. And thanks to Meg and everyone at the Faith Alliance for Climate Solutions for hosting this panel. And also, I just want to acknowledge the attendees who are tuning in to listen to this and really just thank you for caring about these issues and to remind everyone that your voices really do have an impact, and even just your interest in this topic area can go a really long way. And so please stay involved and stay up to speed on where Virginia is, because we need all the help we can get to keep moving in the right direction. Thanks.
Thank you. Delegate Herring.
Thank you so much. I just enjoyed the opportunity to share with everybody all that we've done in Virginia. This just is one legislative session. It was a joy and an opportunity. And the only parting word that I would give for everybody is to reflect. I remember last year there was a large movement of young people who were talking about the climate crisis and change. So I think as we lead, in our policy or in our businesses, we also, I think, if we can continue to encourage children to really actually care about the environment, and I'm just hoping that it will last, because they will continue to foster it as when we're not here anymore, but they will be the ones who will foster and continue this conversation. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chase Counts, Harry Godfrey, Trieste Lockwood, and Delegate Herring for joining us. We now invite you to continue listening as we move to the next segment of our program this evening, in which I have the opportunity to speak with Senator Mark Warner about the climate crisis. It's my pleasure to introduce Senator Warner now. Senator Warner was elected to the U.S. Senate in November 2008 and re-elected to a second term in November 2014. He serves on the Senate Finance, Banking, Budget, and Rules Committees, as well as the Select Committee on Intelligence, where he is the vice chairman. From 2002 to 2006, he served as the governor of Virginia. Prior to that, Mark spent 20 years as a technology and business leader in Virginia before entering public office. An early investor in the cellular telephone business, he co-founded the company that became Nextel. Senator Warner and his wife, Lisa Collis, live in Alexandria, Virginia. They have 3 daughters. Senator Warner, welcome to the 5th Annual Virginia Climate Forum.
Shyamali, thank you for that wonderful introduction. And thank you for this opportunity to talk about where we as a country, where we as the Commonwealth, where we as a world need to head. The fact that this is an alliance of people of so many different faiths that I think at our core all respect the earth, is a wonderful opportunity. And it's also great as coming from a day in the halls of the Senate to kind of get my head out of my day job for a moment. Although as a job applicant, I'm obviously hoping to earn people's support in 42 days when we vote. But looking forward to this conversation.
Terrific. Senator Warner, I know we met last week at your Veterans Roundtable discussion. And I just wanted to say that thank you for that opportunity. But tonight I am here as Vice Chair of FACS to discuss climate crisis, and so and how we can reduce the energy burden in Virginia and in the climate crisis in general. So I have several questions for you in that realm. We have fires burning out west. Hurricanes are getting stronger as the world gets warmer. Virginia and Hampton Roads region is experiencing the highest rates of sea level rise along the entire Atlantic seaboard. Here in Fairfax County, Virginia, we had more 90-degree days in July than ever before in history. What is it going to take to turn this around?
Well, Shyamali, I think the science is settled. I'm not even sure even some of the biggest opponents will publicly still say they don't believe man is affecting the change in climate. And as you just went through, I mean, how can anyone deny that? With the West on fire, with hurricanes, ravaging the Gulf and more coming this week, with the 90-degree plus weather, not only in Fairfax, it was the same in Alexandria. And I think if we step back for a moment, that our country, today is a fairly sobering day when we've hit 200,000 dead from COVID. I think, again, regardless of our partisan affiliation, most people would give this administration a failing grade on how America reacted to COVID. We didn't have PPE, we didn't have testing. We've seen this administration undermine, I think, in many ways, the ultimate gold standards like the CDC and the FDA. And the chances, while we knew there was a statistical chance of a pandemic hitting us, we kind of underestimated that. Well, the statistical chance of climate change happening is so much greater than the chance of a pandemic hitting. And you pointed out, I mean, our Navy spends literally hundreds of millions of dollars a year raising piers because of sea level rise. And I think there's going to be an opportunity. I'm a little bit in my political mindset, so I want to get the policy answers. But if we have a change in the political administration, where we can rebrand this problem, I think I caught the end of the last panel. We do have to, tell people the consequences of inaction, but you also have to bring an optimism to this debate that this is something we can accomplish, and America can lead. Virginia can lead specifically. For friends in Hampton Roads, the bane of living in Hampton Roads sometimes are the bridge tunnels and the challenges with the tunnels, but it also means that we can produce the blades for the windmills. We can have the biggest offshore wind opportunities off the coast of Virginia, and we can get those blades out because we've got tunnels in a much easier way than any place else on the East Coast. And the opportunity, and I've always had this dream for some time, that Appalachia, Southwest Virginia, which powered the economy in the 20th century with coal, something that is could be transformed into the area where we could manufacture, whether it's wind turbines, solar panels, a host of other cleaner energy devices that I think are very rapidly becoming, and could be the kind of backbone of a 21st century Virginia economy. So we all know the scary statistics, but there's also is an optimistic side here that if we take advantage, and I've got a series of policies I hope we'll get a chance to discuss tonight that I think will move us in that direction.
Sure. I'm really glad you mentioned coal country. I was actually there about 10 days ago in Wise, St. Paul, and Bristol, and they are really looking to reimagine. And as much as we need to lift them up, we also need to look at the coastal regions that are suffering from sea level rise. So it's good that you're looking at all of that. You mentioned COVID-19. Low-income communities and communities of color have been disproportionately affected by COVID-19 and the economic downturn and by ongoing environmental injustices. How can we ensure that they are not left behind as we bring in the green economy?
Well, first of all, one of the things that I've been trying to do, and we do need another COVID relief bill, as you told the audience. I've actually spent much longer in business, about 30 years, than I have in politics, but I've never seen a time where there was as much discrepancy between where the stock market is and where the real economy is. And we know, both in terms of incidence of being hit by the disease. I mean, we've got our Latino population is about 9% in Virginia. 50% of the cases were Latino, way disproportionate amongst Black Americans as well. one of the things that I think we need to do is, as we do another COVID relief package, which we need, and frankly, Congress shouldn't break without that additional assistance, we need to include disparity data on how the programs that have laid out there, the small business PPP program, other things, are how they've affected different communities, because it's not been an equal distribution around the healthcare relief. And on the green economy, I think one of the most important things we need to do, and this is green economy related, but it's even broader related, which is we don't have equality of access to capital in this country. My story was I failed the first 2 times before I had business success. If I had not had a white guy with the appropriate education, I'm not sure I'd had a 3rd try, let alone a 2nd try or a 1st try. And when we're talking about the green economy, we have to make sure access to capital. And in the next COVID package, and I've got broad Republican support, we will take about $15 billion of unallocated funds from COVID and invest it in community development financial institutions who have a history of redeveloping communities, and they have green energy objectives as well. I think we need that green energy bank. I think we need to put in place a industrial development, and not an industrial development bank, but a infrastructure development bank. I've got legislation on that as well. And so much of this goes to access to capital is one piece, and the other is access to skills. One of the things that I would like, and I think there's a real opportunity here, because I want to get to the question of how we get corporate America to be involved in this transition, is we're going to have to realize that in many ways what COVID did was simply accelerated the transition to a digital economy. 10 years of transition take place in 6 months. And unfortunately, a third of the jobs that we've lost will not come back. We need to change our tax, accounting, and reporting system to reward companies who invest in human capital. And I would give an extra reward for those who invest in human capital that are training people for green-related jobs. We've got the insanity right now where if a company buys a robot for $5,000, you get a tax credit, the robot's an asset, and you can report it. If you spend the same amount of money training somebody to do a better job than the robot, you don't get the same tax break, you don't get the same accounting benefit. That is a crazy cycle, and there is ways that we can dial this towards, again, green-related skills jobs that really could be. You can do this both at the federal level and at the Virginia level, and I welcome a chance to share some of my ideas on a broader, longer basis with how we can change that human capital investment formula. Because if not, we're going to have the people who will disproportionately benefit will be the highest educated, and communities of color in particular will be left behind, and that will simply exacerbate the divisions we already have in our country.
Right, thank you. And I know the COVID relief bill is critical and important to our communities, in the same way that all these same communities, lower income communities, rely more on mass transit, which is also an essential component of course, reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So we know right now in the transportation area that mass transit is struggling. What is being done to ensure the viability of WMATA and other mass transit systems across the U.S.?
Well, they are struggling everywhere. You can't have, on Metro at this point, we've had a decline of ridership of about 88%. Yeah. Still, on buses, we're down to, it's a smaller decline, but since Metro has gone ahead and allowed free bus travel, but we're going to have to dig our way out, and you can't do this without additional federal support. And it's not going to be in the 5 or 10 billion. It's going to be, upwards of 100 billion. It's one of the reasons why the next COVID package has to have state, local government, and transit relief, number one. Number two, COVID has also demonstrated that the way we're talking on this webinar, broadband is an economic necessity. Again, if you do not have low-income communities both access to broadband, and that's not just in rural communities, that's in many suburban communities, and then the ability to actually put a cap on your data so you're not going to be charged so much. And we're going to need to make that kind of investment in ubiquitous broadband, with the same way that the country made the investment on rural electrification in the 1930s. So, mass transit, broadband, the fact that our work habits are going to be dramatically changed. I mean, there are positive things, and we've had about a 2,000% increase in telehealth over the last 6 months. How people receive their healthcare is fundamentally changing. And that can be both good for people, but it's also can be good for the planet in terms of it decreases the amount of, in certain cases, superfluous trips. Let me just take one other minute. I know this is on 2 other items, if you don't mind. One is, we obviously need tax advantages around green energy creation and equality of tax treatment. I also think, we need to go ahead and bite the bullet, and there is a moment that we need to have a carbon fee in place and with an appropriate rebate for people who are going to be disproportionately affected. But one area that I don't think there's been near enough discussion, I don't want to jump ahead on, this may be the next question, so I don't want, I'm not sure what the next one, but I want to get this out because
you're fine.
Because it's really, it's something that I don't hear enough from. I think there is a growing sense from customers, from investors, that we want to buy from or invest in responsible companies. And again, the notion that this forum is around faith-based. I mean, if we didn't have faith as our basis, we might not care about our how we treat our fellow man. But I think increasingly the movement towards better corporate behavior is taking place, and it takes place in what's called the ESG movement, the environment, societal, and governance movement. And I think the amount we could move if we required public companies to report on their resiliency, if we had them report on their environmental movements, if we had them report on climate, what gets measured gets actually followed in the corporate world, as we all know. And until we put those kind of reporting requirements along with the government regulation or fee structure or tax incentives, we really need, I think the business community just needs this signal. I also believe we need it around human capital investment as well. But I think on environment, if we're looking, it's kind of nerdy to talk about accounting standards, but I think SASB and some of these other efforts that are looking at new accounting standards that look at sustainability could have such a powerful effect. And something I hope if I get rehired, that I can, I sit on the banking committee, can move the SEC forward on. The SEC has already started to move forward on human capital reporting. I think sustainability, environmental adherence is what customers want, what investors want, and I think has been a bigger part of the solution set than what's commonly discussed.
Excellent, and that is great. It's one of the things that we've struggled with for many years, of course, is getting the business community engaged and involved in this. So I'm really happy to hear that you're looking at some ways to do that. You sit on you're on the Intelligence Committee as the vice chairman. Have members discussed President Trump's withdrawal from the Paris Climate Accord in that committee?
We have not in a substantive way. It has been discussed in the Foreign Relations Committee, but this is again a case where I think Americans' withdrawal really hurts us from a security standpoint, not only from a global leadership standpoint, from a security standpoint. When the rest of the world is moving in one direction and the United States opts out, and whether it's on Paris climate, whether it's on, again, an issue that I'm deeply involved in, challenges around social media and the fact that America is the only member of the G7 that's not part of the Christchurch call about trying to ban extremism on social media or grappling with it. And I see this again as somebody who used to be in the technology business. America used to lead not only on innovation around technology, but then setting the standards, rules, protocols, procedures. And particularly under this administration, we have withdrawn from that. And we as people of faith, your rules, whether they are rules around how a company reports, or whether we adhere to international standards around climate, or frankly, even the rules around as we develop new technologies, and I say this is from 5G or artificial intelligence or quantum computing, you can reflect your values in those rules, protocols, and procedures. And again, it's a little, that is something that we need to reestablish. And I think there is a real opportunity because our challenge now is China has a different approach with particularly in terms of almost Orwellian surveillance, authoritarianism. And my beef is not with the Chinese people, it's with the Communist Party and President Xi Jinping. But I think there are going to be two models, and for a while, America led as that alternative model. And when we walk away from Paris and other international obligations, that again, I think is an attack on our national security.
Absolutely. So coming back to Virginia, um, Virginia's ranking in energy efficiency is now 29th in the nation overall. What can you do in the Senate to help Virginia become a leader?
Well, I used to be the national chairman of the energy efficiency organization, and Gene Shaheen's really done a good job on that since that time. And we're still trying to get those energy efficiency standards kind of drilled in more as basic business practices. So I think, and this is actually real time, the debate of whether we could get an energy bill before the election that would include these energy efficiency standards is still up. I obviously clearly support it. I think one of the things that I can do is work with Governor Northam and then next governor after 2021 in a way to see if Virginia can move more to the forefront. I do think our power generation community in Virginia, was maybe a little slow to come to the table, but I think they've excuse the pun, got religion now, and whether it's the offshore wind development or some of the solar farms that are being developed, I think there's a real chance here for Virginia to, going back to Harrison's comments, to really take a lead. But it's going to take the standard setting around energy efficiency. It's going to take leadership from our generation community, our power companies. It's going to take, I think, real engagement from the business community. But we're not going to get where we want to be in Virginia without that other investment in human capital. If we continue to have affluent communities make the change, and poor communities or communities of color not make the change or not be part of this transformation, then we're not going to get there.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I know your time is very limited and we're almost at the end. Do you have any last comments that you'd like to make?
I just want to, two things. One of the things I wanted to mention as well, that, in the age of COVID and with all the political bickering, didn't get as much attention that I would have liked, but I think it's really significant for Virginia and for the environment writ large. Back in August, Mr. Trump signed legislation that I've been working on for 3.5 years called the Great American Outdoors Act, that makes the largest investment in our history in repairing and restoring our national parks and permanently funding the Land and Water Conservation Fund. So, I know this was mostly a discussion about climate and carbon policies, but it's, carbon as well as preservation of what our natural beauty. In Virginia is a huge beneficiary of that. We have, of the $12 billion in backlog, we've got about 1.1 billion of that. So really important for Virginia, 10,000 jobs that will be related to both the outdoors and tourism. And then the other point though is, and I, as others have mentioned, in Virginia, for good or bad, we have elections every year. And each year politicians say, and this year is the most important. Well, and I'm saying that it really is the most important this year. And I'm not saying it necessarily because I am on the ballot. It is because we have to decide whether, what our country's going to be. And I do fear that the current administration, which, has never had as many falsehoods, demonstrable falsehoods of any administration, that has walked away from things like Paris and still is one of the few remaining, deniers of climate change. We need to get out and vote. We need to get out and make sure our voices are heard. And I think brighter days are ahead. I think we're going to get through COVID. I think we're going to build this green economy, but that's going to also take leadership at the local, state, and federal level that will acknowledge the problem and realize that as Americans, there's no problem we can't fix if we put our heads to it, put our minds to it. And that's what I hope we will grapple with over the coming weeks.
Thank you so much, Senator Warner. And I very much appreciate you taking the time and making the time to be here with us tonight and share some of your thoughts and some of the legislation that you're working on. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shyamali. Thank you all. Be well, everybody.
Well, Senator Warner stole a little bit of my thunder, but I cannot stress how important it is to vote this year. The polls are open across Virginia for early in-person absentee voting as we speak. You can vote early absentee, by mail, or on November 3rd. Make sure that you vote. In addition, as Senator Warner said, we have elections every year, so make sure your voice is heard. Next, I want to extend an invitation for you to participate in Climate in the Pulpits. October 2nd through 4th, faith communities are invited to participate on or around that weekend of October 2nd through 4th, 2020, when pastors, rabbis, imams, and other clergies and faith communities across the region will be raising up voting as a sacred responsibility of the beloved community. So visit the FACTS website to sign up to commit your community to raise up the importance of voting safely on November 3rd for MLK's vision of a beloved community and for leaders who will fight for climate justice. If you enjoyed this evening's event, please consider donating to FACTS. Our programs are dependent on the generous support of organizations in the community and individuals like you. Finally, thank you for attending the 5th Annual Virginia Climate Crisis Forum. To stay informed about future events and additional FACTS programs, sign up using the website on the screen. Let us all walk softly upon the earth. Namaste and good night.